So I just want to show you how you can create tables in Affinity Publisher. So these are a great way of presenting data in an orderly and structured manner across rows and columns. So you can use this for comparative reasons, to compare values and different bits of information in those rows and columns. So what we'll do is we'll just recreate this particular table once I delete it. I'll just describe it for you. So across the top you've got different models of drones, and across the rows down here you've got different characteristics of each model. So I'll just delete this particular table and let's recreate it. So just also switch off this image here because it's a little bit distracting. And now let's start creating our first table. So from the table tool, top left here, just select that. I can snap to a left point of this text here. You can see that green vertical snapping line because snapping is enabled on the toolbar. And that gets me a very accurate starting point for the table. Now, as I'm dragging this table out, I'm getting a kind of a readout, this kind of black panel to the right of the cursor, and it's telling me the width and height of the table. And it's also telling me, perhaps more importantly, the column count and the row count, because it's often quite important to set that or have an understanding of what that column value and the row value would be in advance. So, for instance, we're going to pick a column count of 3 and a row count of 8. And once I release the mouse button, I can then resize that particular table, keeping the number of columns and rows the same, to say about there for the moment. So now let's have a look at the table panel. So the table panel allows you to format the table in different ways and select cells and give it a kind of a very characteristic look. So if I go to the table tool again, ensure that is enabled. From the context toolbar, select table panel. I'll just drop it down to about here so we can see what we're doing. And I can change initially the frame fill and stroke of the table in this section here. So I can select the fill to be perhaps colour picked from this yellow colour. A bit garish at the moment, but if I just drop down the opacity, you can see that it could work in a particular design. I'll just undo there. And similarly, I can change the stroke of the table using a similar approach and setting perhaps a higher stroke width. You can see that only affects the surrounding box of the table itself and not the cells in between. So in this particular design, I don't actually want to use the fill and stroke, so I'll just undo back to how it was before. And instead I want to just focus on how you select columns and rows and cells within the table in different ways. So first of all, we can select columns simply by clicking this column header. Similarly, rows. Individual rows are selected. And we can select adjacent columns together by using the Shift key, just like as in selecting text. So that's column A and column B together. And row 2 and row 3 together. And I'm also able to use the Command key in Mac and Control key in Windows to select non-adjacent columns and rows. So just for columns, as an example, I want to select A and C columns, so I'll just select A. And then with the Command key pressed, Control key on Windows, I can select column C. and that's column C selected. So I can apply the formatting to specific columns if I need to. Now, one of the main ways of selecting though is, particularly for selecting cells, is to use a marquee selection. And this means simply just dragging typically from the top left-hand corner and down to the right to encompass what's actually selected. So in this particular instance, if I just drag, I've just dragged this cell here and selected this cell and the cell below. Just try that again for the whole table. So that's the whole table cells selected. That's column cells selected. And that's row cells selected. And you can use the shift and the command principles of selecting adjacent and non-adjacent cells as we did before for columns and rows. So I want to select the entire cells in the table and apply a different height to them. So just as an example, we're just going to change the height to say 1.5. But that's a little bit too much, but at least you see the principle of changing all the row heights all at the same time. So I'll just undo that back to 1.2 as it was before. Now I can also change the inside border colour of all the cells. You see this black line all the way around the different cells. So if I select again all of the cells within the table, I can go to this border option here. There's actually two I want to tell you about. One is outside and one is inside. So the border outside means the cell border where this dark blue line is, right the way around. And that's currently set to black, as you see here, the cell stroke fill. And I want to remove that, so I can just click there and choose no fill. Now if I then jump over to this next inside option, that's the option that, as you can see, they're being highlighted there. That's the black lines between the cells. And as that's selected now, what I can do is I can change that to be a white colour. And when I deselect, we should find that we've got the table looking exactly as we want. Now, let's have a look at resizing columns. So there are several ways to resize. For instance, if I want to make this column A wider, I can use a drag at this column divider and this column header. But the problem is that I'm compressing column B. I don't actually want to do that, because what I want to do is to make the column, or rather the entire table, bigger. And by pressing the Shift key and then dragging at that dividing line on the header, I'm getting a value of about 3, which is kind of what I want really, so I can get more information in there. So equally, if I wanted to insert columns after A, if I select B and right click and do insert, that will insert a column before column B. So let's look at the columns B and C. So columns B and C at the moment are equally spaced. Now if I accidentally change the value of the column B width just by accidentally dragging, I can actually select both together with the Shift key and then right click and choose evenly distribute columns, and that resets the column width to be the same for both. Now in this instance I can change those values back to be having a width of 1.6, I think. That makes those a little bit smaller. Okay, so now let's just copy and paste some text into this particular table. So you can copy and paste Excel data directly into publisher tables, but in this occasion I've just happened to have used a very basic table from publisher to paste the content into. So I've just selected this table cells, and I want to now just paste without format, because I want to keep the text unformatted for the moment and then just format it a little bit within the table. So I want to do that. That brings the text in. And you can see initially that the alignment of the text is to the top, and I can change this by just selecting and choosing from the table vertical alignment option the center align, and that's center aligns. I can also pick a particular inset value, and I can just boost that a little bit, the left hand side. Now if I wanted to increase that value all the way around, I can keep this checked. So that would be link insets, and that means that the inset all the way around would be increased. But I'm kind of happy with that. Now that's the table roughly how I want it. The only one thing left to do is to apply some formatting. So if I just do that right now, I can make that a bold. And all of these text formatting options on here would apply whilst we're in the text tool, because this is table text we're dealing with. So I'll just leave that there. So if I want to subsequently add an extra column, there are several things I can do. I can insert a column before the selected column. So in this case, I could have a column inserted before column C by using the insert column option. But what I want to do is to add a column afterwards. And if you see this double arrow marker there, if I just drag to the right, when you get a distance which is approximate to the width of your column C, you'll get an extra column pop up. This is a really good way of just increasing the column count in your table. Now, if I kept dragging, I would just increasingly introduce new columns as I go, but I just want one at the moment. And we've removed the 3 or 4 new ones that we created there. So if I just release there, and I can just add some extra information into this, this particular cell. Now one thing left to do is just to fix this lack of a white line here. So if I just select those cells and then choose this option just here, and that is the left option. And you can see it's targeted that particular line down there. If I just choose white, then we should have a table just there, exactly as intended. One thing left to do, so sometimes when you create tables you want to give emphasis to a particular column. For instance, it might be your flagship product. So you can select that table and give it some slightly different formatting or strengthen its importance in the table. So up here we'll just select column B, and we're going to choose a different fill for that particular set of cells. I'll just click here, go to swatches and choose a darker colour. And I'll also choose a stronger, or rather a thicker width to the cells there. I'll just boost that up to, say, here. Now you may notice that we've got some a black stroke at the top and bottom, but again we can fix that easily by just choosing option here, choosing white, and then this bottom option, choose white again. Okay, so that's how you can create the table as it was originally designed. Gives you a few ideas about how you can create it. If you want to actually save tables for future use, if I just go back to, we'll just keep the table tool for the moment. We'll just select it. And if I go up to the context toolbar again and choose the table format option, and that brings the table formats panel up to view. And this allows me to customize tables, but also to save tables to this particular panel for reuse. So if I click this panel preferences option just here and choose add format from selection, you see that this particular table has been saved for future use. And then if I want to use it in the future, I can just go back to the menu or the panel preferences again, and or rather just here, sorry, and just choose apply format 1, and that will be applied onto any particular table that you have in your document, and it will override the format of that current table.